Thank you. Bhálum fáilte go raibh go léir an seo nuamh ar an lá speisialta seo darnall siúil chun comóra óglaigh na hÉireann ó Macroom, Dúnmharuit, Balla na Grí, Kilnamatra agus Carriganima a bhar seáil amach as an áit seo ar féile na Cosca néideag séideag. I would like to welcome you all here today on this special day for our nation to commemorate the Irish volunteers from the companies of Macroom, Downdrad, Ballinagree, Kilnamatra and Carriganima who marched out from here in Easter 1916. For an ordinary working man to volunteer to fight against the might of the British Empire with their abundant resources, weaponry and training was an extraordinary deed of courage. When you consider the risk to their livelihoods and indeed their lives, the easier option for these courageous volunteers would have been to keep the head down and do nothing. But these brave men were willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom, and we honour them today. Not only do we remember those on active duty, we remember all the people who all helped in so many ways. The people of this area, such as members of Commemoration, people from all over Ireland. They helped by providing safe houses, food for volunteers, or simply by observing a code of silence for the safety of the volunteers. In their actions, they too put their lives and livelihoods and their lives on the line for our country. Following on from the 1916 rising, some were arrested and imprisoned in the UK. Some had to go into hiding, and some emigrated fearing reprisals or even death. Indeed, many of those who marched out from this area during Easter 1916 were subsequently interned by the British in Frongong internment camp in Wales. But they formed the basis of the fight for freedom during the War of Independence in this area. 2018 marks the 100th anniversary of the 1918 elections, which saw Sinn Féin sweep to victory and form the very first Dáil in January 1919. This and many other steps towards our self-governance and freedom would not have been possible if it weren't for the actions of those who took part in the Easter Rising 1916. So in memory of these men and women, we begin our ceremony. To begin with, I'd like us to pause for a moment's silence, to remember and pray for all those who passed away in the last year. I now invite Mairead Casey Toomey to lay the wreath. Mairead's granduncle, volunteer Jeremiah Casey, was shot dead by British forces on the 3rd of January 1921 in Derryfineen, Leary. I now invite Mairead to lay the wreath to the memory of those great men and women who sacrificed all in the struggle for freedom. I now invite Con Lynch to lead the recitation of the Decade of the Rosary in memory of those Patriot Day.
An Kudu Rundiver Dolasuk, Basardin Eranguish, the fifth sorrowful mystery, the crucifixion and death of Jesus on the cross. Orna Heltana, Guneva Tanim, Gudaga the Riok, Gunenta the Hodler and Dolov, Moragentra and Nav. So many that you will taught on the gross, the taunt in a last, the Spanaha who would have annoyed, August the Spanaha, Torres of Brunei Isa. So many that you will taught on the gross, the taunt in a last, the Spanaha who would have annoyed, August the Spanaha, Torres of Brunei Isa. So many that you will taught on the gross, the taunt in a last, the Spanaha who would have annoyed, August the Spanaha, Torres of Brunei Isa. So many has that very tall on the grass, the taunt in the latch, the Spanaha who would have annoyed, August the Spanaha, Torres of Brunei Isa. So many has that very tall on the grass, the taunt in the latch, the Spanaha who would have annoyed, August the Spanaha, Torres of Brunei Isa. So many has that very tall on the grass, the taunt in the latch, the Spanaha who would have annoyed, August the Spanaha, Torres of Brunei Isa. So many has that with his tall on the grass, the taunt in a latch, the Spanaha who would have annoyed, August the Spanaha, Torres of Brunei Isa. So many has that with his tall on the grass, the taunt in a latch, the Spanaha who would have annoyed, August the Spanaha, Torres of Brunei Isa. So many has that with his tall on the grass, the taunt in a latch, the Spanaha who would have annoyed, August the Spanaha, Torres of Brunei Isa. So many has that with his tall on the grass, the taunt in the latch, the Spanaha who would have annoyed, August the Spanaha, Torres of Brunei Isa. Glory be Nahir, August and Bach, August and Sprit Nail. Yesti Grevenal Machusel, August Anam Nakan, the Mar of Galir. In Animanahar, August and Beak, August and Sprit Nail. Amen.
Thank you. Ireland's battle was also a battle of equality and freedom. On the 100th anniversary of the first vote for women, we invite the representatives of the suffragettes to come forward now, please. Thank you. I now invite Martin Coughlin to read the proclamation.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
Public na heaven, the provisional government of the Irish Republic to the people of Ireland. Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God, of the dead generations from which she receives her old tradition and nationhood. Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. Having organised and trained her manhood through her secret revolutionary organisation, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and through her open military organisations, the Irish Volunteers, the Irish Citizen Army, having patiently perfected her discipline, having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal itself, she now seizes that moment and, supported by her exiled children in America and by gallant allies in Europe, but relying in the first on her own strength, she strikes in full confidence of victory. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies, to be sovereign and indefeasible. The long obsession of that right by a foreign people and government has not extinguished the right, nor can it ever be extinguished except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have asserted their right to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times during the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms, standing on the fundamental right and again asserting it in arms in the face of the world. We hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign independent state, and we pledge our lives and the lives of our comrades in arms to the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, and of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to, and hereby claims, the allegiance of every Irishman and Irishwoman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts, cherishing all its children of the nation equally and oblivious of the differences carefully fostered by an alien government which have divided the minority from the majority in the past, until our arms have brought the opportune moment for the establishment of a permanent national government representative of the whole people of Ireland, and elected by the suffrages of all her men and women. The provisional government, hereby constituted, will administer the civil and military affairs of the Republic in trust for the people. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we invoke upon our arms, and we pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonour it in cowardice, inhumanity, or rapine. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valour and in discipline, by its readiness and its children to sacrifice themselves for the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called. Signed on behalf of the Provisional Government, Thomas J. Clark, Sean McDermott, Thomas McDonough, P.H. Pearce, Eamon Kant, James Connolly, and Joseph Plunkett.
Thanks, Martin. We are privileged to have as our guest speaker today the historian James O'Leary Carriganima, and I now invite him forward to give the oration.
Hallo Jerry for dere karte. Is moren og årdomse, en sånn av mål, den der større, derfor det fåle. Han har rådsjå og hort liv, må jeg også større tåle hate. På kåren kom året for skjoler en lån, var det sin lån kaste ned i det skjedde til byen Terje bak, og en dagen opptekket av at byen kom året. Han ekspirere ved noe tror lekere, vi en så skattlinjen i kjelen, vi har helhet, sånne helen med linje i kollegiet, har det vakken så, og krohår og til valgse. Ladies and gentlemen, the words that Michael O'Connor often spoke to me ring in my head today, and I start with him when he said that we, the Irish people, had no argument with the English people, but we had a huge argument with the British establishment. We know it at the present day because I can look around me and I can see fellas that support British soccer teams. We have no problem with people going to England any day the night or English people coming to Ireland. But we have and we had, and maybe we still have a problem with the English establishment. Bob Geldof was on the Late Late Show Friday night, and he was talking about ethnic cleansing out in the Bangladesh, wherever it was. But we had ethnic cleansing here in Ireland long before then. We had Cromwell, who gave our people a choice, go to hell or to Connacht. Go back to the plantation of Munster, when this area around Macroom was more or less a dumping ground for the people who were living there abandoned. Breach Cocktree, or Rebelette, is a descendant from the Cocktres, that had been traced back by her uncle, Father Cocktree, that lived near Inishannon 15 generations ago. Their burial ground is on the outskirts of the old graveyard in Clondrohid. Alongside them are the O'Connells, who were forced out of Bandon and they came to Coolabookie. When you go to the old graveyard in Ballybourney, St. Gudnitz, the old Learys are on the western side. Some people think that they're there because they're right beside the gate. That is not so. The number one position for burial alongside St. Gudnitz was alongside the old church. The O'Learys had been near Roscarbery, but they were pushed further north and they came to Leary. And at last, other people came to Liscarrigan eventually, and lo and behold, a lot of the Learys have come back to this place. So, when I was growing up, two people, O'Learys, were my heroes. One of them was Arthur Leary, and the other was Father Leary. Arthur Leary was here when the penal laws were enforced. We're talking about the vote. When the penal laws were enforced, us, the Irish, the Catholics, had absolutely no rights whatsoever. You had no right to vote, you had no right to own land, you had no right to have your religion. You had no right in the church to have a bell that could be rung within the sound of a Protestant bell. When the first bell came here to Macroom, we call them Unionists, but they came from Bandon and they hunted it because it could be heard within the sound of the bell of the Protestant church. It was taken up the church cross and it was hung off a tree and rung there. Arthur Leary had a horse, and one of the rules of the penal laws was that you couldn't own a horse worth more than £5. He was offered £5 to a man in Hanover Hall, and instead of giving him the horse, he gave him a beating, and he had to go on the run because he was declared an outlaw. When he was declared an outlaw, he was within Raleigh, but he was still coming going to his usual places in Dreshan. When he was shot in Carriganima, Carrier Royal built the shot the tree. Green that shot him was shot from the wall of the pound in the yard where I was born. So I always took an interest in it. It was a lucky shot because he was hit across the way and he turned the horse for home, but he basically bled to death because when Eileen Duff came, she had a layer of a gun off the old Houston bottom. I had to drink his blood with my hand. In other words, he bled to death. The place he was hit was not the place where he fell. The people had nothing at the time, but they had their time and they had their co-loader and they had what was given to them for generations. The people who were poets under the Irish Gaelic system and the people who had praised, they more or less all drifted towards Shifrukra because they were safe there. My father came along afterwards and he was born in 1839. When he came to the Latin school down at the end of the hill, he could still see the tree Marley Dubba up here in the top of Bridewell. The tree Marley, the tree Leary Dubba were the heads of the three McCarthy's that were executed in the tree outside the entrance here to the castle. And their bodies were buried in Dundalk. They're just inside the gate, about 15 yards to the left, near a yew tree, and written on it is, "Here lies the bodies of the McCarthy's." They were from their nearest relatives were from Carrigafoker, and some of the McCarthy's are there to the present day. Their heads were put up in the spikes in 1802. Father was born in 1839, he would have been about 14 when he came here to the Latin school, so 50 years later their heads were still on spikes here. That was to keep the ordinary people down. It was the same as having when you were gardening, you had crows attacking it. You shot one crow, you trapped the crow, you hung him up, and you didn't see a crow for the rest of the year. It was there to warn the people as who was in power, and in this town, the castle was the power. 2/3 of the people in Macroom paid rent to the castle. On the other side was Massey, and he got rent from the people on the other side of the town. The Masseys were not too long here in Macroom because in 1700 all the parish of Clondrohid was given to Hedges for £10,000. That was the annual income or rent that was there and Hedges came, and he was given 500 acres to collect that rent each year. Because when I hear people talking about estates that had an income with them, the income was made of the sweat and blood of the ordinary people that lived in there. They were our ancestors, and it was the generations that came after them that suffered sweat, blood in their lives to give us our freedom. They also suffered to give us the vote, and the road to the vote was not easy. We had no votes during the 1700s. By the time it came to the 1800s, those that had 16 shillings in rent were given a vote. It was those 16 shilling landowners in Clare that elected Daniel O'Connell. The goalposts were moved. The following election, it was got up to 30 shillings. Both sides went on, and more Catholics got to be elected. It is important that we talk about them because we had, after 1800, we had no parliament here. The parliament before 1800 was called Grattan's Parliament, but that was a Protestant parliament for Protestant people. Then Catholics like Daniel O'Connell got elected as MPs. We then got Catholic emancipation in 1829, and bit by bit things improved. But then we had the huge famine of 1847, and a million of these people immigrated. We were talking about votes for the women. Before the famine, 75% of the people of Ireland that were immigrating were women. When you hear this singer talking about the open Dennis Island, the band from Meaton, he sang it in 1840. The first person in was Annie Paul from Ireland, and she was only 15 years old. What drove those women, and most of those women were young teenagers or in their early 20s, to go 6 months on a ship to America to get out of this country? It was because of the way they were treated in this country. They were treated, as one woman said to me in Conrad yesterday, they were no better than animals. And my grandmother always said to me, the landlords, as well as only wanting the cattle, they also wanted the women. I can give you 4 instances, south, west, north and east of Macroom, where the landlords abused the women. In Kilbarry, the landlord was known as the Brock because no woman was allowed to get married unless they went to bed with him first. Westward we had the Riddler, and any couple that got married, and the people down here will know about it, the wife had to spend the first night with the Riddler. Here we had Massey, who had a hunting lodge in Mount Horner at Children's Garfield. I can't get his name right ever, but there was a man there in charge of the hunting lodge. And once or twice a year, Massey's friends, the lords, came and they went hunting. And they spent the day hunting, and in the evening they had no Oreaders to go to, or they had no Ollie's nightclub to go to. So the entertainment for them after they'd been fed and watered was that the young girls that were there helping to serve the food to them had to strip off and cover themselves with goose trace or with butter. But they were sportsmen, so they always gave the game a fair chance. So they blindfolded themselves, and their music started, and their fun for the night was that any woman they could catch, they had that woman for the night. The British establishment knew about this because if there was any encounter, if there was any child born because of that encounter, they were seen after. The Friday man came around every Friday, and he made sure that those children were seen after, they were educated. A lot of them went working in the foreign countries for the British establishment. There was money given for their education. On Ridden Balfourna, he cleared what is now the home farm so that his son could have a farm there. In Mill Street, Haggerty's farm was a result of that encounter. All the women that lived in the small little huts, bahans down near the 10 yards, had to go and milk the cows morning and evening for Haggerty. Haggerty was a unionist in the Cork City Council, even though he was a Catholic. And my grandmother could never get over the fact that when Haggerty's reign finished, a bakery was established in his house in the square in Mill Street. And written over the bakery was the word justice. You had boycotting in Mill Street. When Haggerty went into one side of the church, everybody got up and went to the other side. And in the other side of Macroom, we had Brown at Cool Car House. At Fairplay to Williams, who was here in the Castle Hotel, Brown was in one night. He was boasting about the herd of Angus cattle that he had imported from Scotland he was going to breed in. But Williams said to him, what about your herd of heifers that you've inside in the house? That happened for a long time. And it was that drove these young women before the famine to immigrate to America. There was no point in going to England because the same thing happened there. So when Annie Moore was the first, she was one of many Irish women that went to America. The vote came, as the previous speaker had said, in 1918, which was very limited. This was a country for the establishment. It was only women who were over 30 and who owned property had a vote. As was stated, that election took place in November 1918. The first Dáil met on the 19th of January 1920. Ministers were appointed. In May 1918, De Valera had been picked up and he was in Lincoln jail. And the man that was in charge was a Cochran, Michael Collins. And give credit where credit is due, it was Michael Collins that appointed Countess Marchevik as the Labour Minister in the first Dáil. Yesterday in Dublin, 300 women, the descendants of those who took part in 1916, paraded in the Garden of Remembrance. And they remembered where their ancestors were in 1916. But there was none of them in Boland Mill with De Valera, because De Valera would have none of the Commonwealth man with them. And if De Valera had been around in 1919, the first Dáil, Countess Marchevik would not have been appointed. That is my opinion. But if you go through the Dáil since then, De Valera came to Commonwealth stayed in power for 32. De Valera was there for the first bit of the party government of 49 no women. The first of the party government 3 years until the Mother and Child Act for the party. De Valera came back again. It was not until the 80s, and I always remember it because Kevin O'Brien wrote in the Pantomimes and Sunrise a verse of a song about Charlie High, but the one line that sticks with me, but there's a dead treason of John Nanny was saying it must be Charlie's Angel, Mairead Gorgon Quinn. So it took until the 80s for the first woman to be appointed a minister in this country. It is taken for granted now. And if we've anybody to salute, and they've had a tough week no more about it, it's the women of Ireland, Manana Hearn, Tour Boulevard Dave. I want to clarify something that has been written lately, and it has nothing to do with the women, but it's about the War of Independence and the Coolmacara ambush. It was written recently that the Coolmacara ambush was a military success, and that was badly organised, the work to that effect in the Lee Valley News. But nothing could be further from the truth. It was one of the most significant ambushes in the south of Ireland. It was Thornban and Coolmacara and Tamdar in Crossbarry that caused the British to come to the truth. It was a military success. As Michael O'Sullivan said, his daughter's here today, there was over 40 of the British military put horse in the combat unable to fight anymore. The British admitted 28 casualties. We know they admitted 28, but we also know they had more. But the most significant thing about Coolmacara ambush is that they knew beforehand, because there was a spy with them, with the IRA fellas. His name was O'Connor, and Michael often spoke about him, and he said he didn't want to say too much because he could be a distant relative of his. He was from Darnley Street in Cork. He had been in the British Army, and he was fighting in Belgium. And he got an award, was known as the CROIX the year, and a letter came home informing his parents that he was getting this award. if you had a son in the military fighting for the British then, and a letter came home, it was bad news. The son was either dead, wounded, captured, or missing in action. And when the postman came and they saw the envelope on His Majesty's service, the mother started crying. And they opened the letter, and then they were surprised to find that he was been awarded the CROIX. So she went in next door to her sister Noni, and Noni had the scream, and Noni said to Mr. O'Connor, "Is it Paddy?" "Oh God, tis," she said, "he's after getting the trucks." and Noni said, "Well, the know something, the last thing I said to my Johnny, and he got out the door, be very careful with those foreign women because you could pick up anything out of them." When he came back to Cork, he was out of trucks, but trucks doesn't stay well with the local dialect in Blarney Street, so he changed from trucks to being Cruxy. And Cruxy O'Connor became the machine gunner on the loose gun on this side of the ambush. He had fierce influence with the OC O'Hagerty, and he got himself changed from the western one where Hugh was to this side. He also said he had to go to christening while they were in the ambush site, and they were there for a week. And he came in here to the castle and he told them what the plans were, where everybody was. Usually the plans went to 1 or 2 lorries to Ballavourne raiding once a week. And they'd leave about 9 or 10 in the morning. That morning they left around 7. They had 7 lorries with 2 machine guns in each of them, and they're full of auxiliaries. They went to the cross there for the touring car in front of them, and when they came into the ambush they were there at 8 o'clock. Cruxy was across the road in one of the cottages, and he ran across so they knew they were in the right place then. He went to the machine gun site and he fired 1 full pan into the ground. That was a signal that they were in the right place. One of the officers ran up to Strack and Leary and said, "Surrender your Irish swine," and they fired 2 shots and dropped the 2 of them. They were the first shots fired in the ambush. The Western Loose Gun had Eugene and Michael O'Sullivan, and they saw Grant and the rest of the lorries, and they opened up then. It was a huge success for the Irish because the loose guns were firing 303 ammunition, and they were outgunning the Hotchkiss by the tens by nearly 50 yards. As the battle went on, the tens and the auxiliaries were driven into the 2 cottages as Eugene and Michael moved through the ground over towards the eastern side. You will never, never understand Cornacora ambush until you go into it. Staying on the road and looking in or looking at the flags that we put there now doesn't mean a thing. Walk into it, see what the terrain is, because it was the terrain that made that ambush. And it was well planned. It was because of the terrain was picked. And Sean Hagerty was asked to move close to the Macroom, but he wouldn't do it. He held his ground. Cruxy went off at the tents, and he went in to Cork, and he stayed in Victoria Barracks, no Collins Barracks. And he came out with a shoot to kill group by the tents. He knew where the people in Blarney Street, there were 15 Cork City riflemen took part in Cornacora. Riflemen were no good inside the city. What you wanted in the city was grenades and revolvers. And they had stayed in Tiggy Creedon in Baltonic and gone into position 6 o'clock every morning. And when I got there, that was from the 21st to the 25th of February, and the weather was bad. So in one way, when the weather was bad today, I said, that's great. People get an idea what the people before us went through to get our freedom. There was a man from Cooley staying with them, and I won't say his name, but the 5 fellas were staying at Keith's in Ballygannon, Holly Keith, and they had done their arms the night before. This is the week after Cornacora ambush, and they were staying in the barn outside. And Cruxy came with tents, and they surrounded the barn. The lads were captured, and they were let go one by one and winged, and then they were bayoneted to death. And the last man was crucified up against the barn door before he was bayoneted to death. The witnesses that were there said that when the coffins were being taken to the North Infirmary, there was blood still flowing out of the coffins. Cruxy was a wanted man because Holly Keefe's grandfather, when he came out, the mask slipped on Coxey's face, and he saw it, and he knew who he was. He only came out at night then, and there was Tim Bates to kill him in Victoria Barracks, so he went to England. Sean Hegarty sent 3 fellas to England to get him. They failed. It was the Commemoration women that intercepted letters that knew that the address was, knew where he was. It wasn't safe in England for him, so like most boys, the British paid for his passage to America. When he was in America, he wrote home, and the letter was intercepted again, and they knew he was in America. But Sean Hegarty, being a man in power, didn't say, no, we'll leave him go. Michael Collins heard about it, and he said, we'll get him. And he got 2 of what was his squad in Cork City. That was Pa Murray and Donovan, and they went to England with the truce negotiations with Collins. And the man from Cooley went on his own steam. How do I know it? Because by accident I met his son at the lodge of Tasman Old Warrior. And his father never spoke about what happened until they were both in an accident, like a lot of the IRA men. They never spoke what happened, but they were in hospital for 3 weeks together. And he opened up then, as his son said, about what happened. I said, I had heard that half the police force in New York were looking for him. And he said, no, they were not. That he'd taken a gun from the overshot trucks, he'd taken a gun from police officer to shoot him. He said, no, he had taken his own revolver, and more than that, he brought back his own revolver. He paid for his own fare. He didn't go with the 2 Cork City boys, but they met off in New York, and they tracked Coxey down. And they knew he was getting off with Tran, and they had him surrounded, they had him triangled. And Coxey got off the tram, and he saw Pa Murray. Now, Pa Murray was in special operations in Cork City. If there was a job to be done, he was one of the men to do it. And when he saw Pa Murray, he knew his game was up, so he started running, and he ran the direction of the man from Cooley. And Pa Murray showed at the man from Cooley, get him. So the man from Cooley took out his revolver and cocked it and fired. Then he beat the revolver, fired below. The first shot, you were not too sound, but the second shot, you were a lot steadier. Well, he fired the first one and he missed. And he fired the second one and he also missed. As he's coming nearer doing it. But he hit him with the third one, and he knocked him with the 4th bullet. And he went off and he finished him off with the last 2. And then he had a problem, because he had to get out of there and he had to get back to Ireland. He was his own steam. He had a hat on that was like the Matthew ones, and Murray said he dropped the hat, and he jumped the hat and he went into the path. He got a spin, he got a lift back to Ireland, was from on a German coal boat, but it wasn't going to Europe straight, it was going to Hamburg first. So the Germans, he knew him, he was a hero to them, he'd killed a British spy. So they took him to Hamburg, but they were staying there for a week before they came back to Ireland. So they had to hide him for a week in Hamburg. And where did they hide him for the week? In their local brothel. He came back to Ireland, and the man that told me the story, his grandson immigrated to America. And the grandson in America showed the son where Coxey was shot. The only thing I wrote down today was to make sure of this. The report, if anyone to Google it, it's in the New York Times on the 15th of the 4th, 1922. There's also an account in the Daily Mail, and it happened in Central Park West. So we're here today honouring the people that went before us, and we're prepared to go to the end of the earth to right or wrong. And we are here as well to honour the memory of the people that fell and were butchered. We are here to remember the first ball in this. The Irish Parliamentary Party were decimated. They were John Redmond's party. They were the party that advocated that the Irish volunteers go to Flanders and be cannon fodder for the British establishment. In the election of 1918, Sinn Féin got 73 seats, the Unionists got 26 seats, and the Irish Parliamentary Party got 6 street. Does that remind you of anything? When they met, they appointed the first Dáil, and the first Irish bond, the first Minister for Finance was Michael Collins. And when Michael Collins was shot at Beal Blah, he was the Commander-in-Chief of the Irish Republican Army. The Republican prisoners in Mountjoy, every one of them knelt down and said the rosary for him. It was no wonder that he was voted the best Irishman of the 20th century. This is a non-party commemoration. Any commemoration I've been involved in has to be non-party, non-political. So it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention Michael Collins and what he did for the Irish people. This is one commemoration. We have a lot more to face into. On the 7th of July 1918 was the first armed actual combat after 1916. It happened in Bearnaglana, the mouth of the Glen. The people of Tipperary say that was Dan Breen on the 19th of January 1920 the first engagement took place. No, the first engagement took place here in Westmore Street at Bearnaglana, the mouth of the Glen, on Sunday evening, the 7th of July 1918. There must be an area, a fish, a black shoal, whatever you like to call it, held in Cooley. And even before, the British soldiers and the RUC that were there then came to the organisers and said it was being banned. Banned! You were going stopping the Cooley people singing? Not a hope in hell. They met and they decided they'd move it 3 miles back the road to Comey Clovan. That morning, the Lidge the Rock and his wife were going down to Massabellingary, and the two RIC, Ben and Bellingary, Bennett and Butler were coming up on a sidecar, and they pointed their rifles at them, and Mrs. Lynch said to the husband, "A pity somebody wouldn't take them down a peg." It happened. There were 6 men involved. Jamie Moynihan, the 2 Tories from Turindove, Johnny Lynch the Rock, the first man in IRA uniform, then Katie McSweeney, co-leader, and from Paris came Riley. The RIC men were coming back from enforcing the ban, what they thought was the ban in Cooley, and there was nothing on in Cooley, so they were coming home, and the ambush took place. They took 2 rifles off of them, and they took 50 rounds of ammunition from each of them. They had 2 shotguns and a few revolvers that they had in the dump, and Butler got shot in the neck, and he was the first that was shot after 1916. Not in Tipperary, but here in County Cork. And let nobody mistake that. It was the 7th of the 7th, 1918. Maybe this year, in the end of July, we'll do some commemoration. Definitely, Phil and the Lake will be on in Cooley. It might be with that, it might be some other way, but it will be commemorated, make no mistake about it. Nilborada Aragon, Bina Bakers, the Mana, August the Ferna Herden, Hassan Shodoi. When America declared independence, the first line of American independence was, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal." In 1916, the proclamation was read. It said, "Irish men and Irish women." At least we were first in that line to give recognition to the women. And Philly Dominish, Kulbula Basela, Ahur, the Manana Herden.
Thank you, James. I now invite Michael Bradley and Donald Keller for the national anthem. Thank you. Sing a piano.
Hartly marani koi, bear my fester, shantir ashing nasta, the offer ventir on off and tron, and of the hints of the way. Leganer strength convoys no stale, Legon his trail, they love not be led, shall live calmly or on the land. Thank you. I wish finally to thank all those who took part in today's commemoration. Jimmy Healy for providing the sound today, John Deneen, Michael Bradley and Donald Keller for the music. I want to thank Con Lynch, Martin Coughlin, Murray Casey Toomey and indeed our speaker James Leary for coming here today. Comala Shud Pavalam Buekas a Glachlesh and Quishta, Asa Nubbery and Shid Aaron Camora Nuth. Dera Bavalam Buekas a Horti Villigas Tacton Shaw, Conan Naferagus Namana on Edig Shadig a Camora. Gamevidin Shaw, Risha and Law Shaw and Green Shakun. I would also like to thank all the members of the committee for all their work in organising of today's events, and of course our flag bearers, so I almost forgot, Shawnee McSullivan and Ted Meany for bearing the flag today. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for coming here today in remembrance of those men and women of 1916, and I hope to see you all here again next year. Gurmila Magat Swanwala.